All right, we are alive.
And we are live. Welcome to Storyboard with Heather and Blake. That's Heather. That's
Hi.
Heather. And I'm Blake. And she's in New Jersey, and I'm in Houston, Texas. And we are so very happy to connect with you again. We've started this little project. It's just kind of for fun and hopefully interesting and maybe can inspire some folks who like to write stories, who like to paint or draw. And I read, and my partner Heather creates art right before your eyes. So, how are you doing, Heather?
I'm doing good. I'm excited about today's story. Some characters that we've been waiting to meet for a little while. We actually get to meet them and interact with them a bit today, so that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and what about last week's picture? The
I
finished.
finally finished it. I always say, the problem with being an artist is nothing's ever finished, until that deadline hits. So I was still working on this one probably about 10 minutes before we started streaming today. So just let me pop that up to show everyone.
Dum dum dum. Gonna pop up.
Oh, I might not have Photoshop.
Uh
Oh, no,
oh.
I have Photoshop open. Um, Hang on. Well, I can always do it
Well,
this
writing
way.
stories is a lot like art. You never finish until you finally hand the paper over to someone else and say, "Take it away from me. I'm done." I
There
never
we go.
stop.
Oh, here we
Oh,
go.
good. Oh, what did you add in the last 10 minutes? What did you do? 10
In
minutes.
the last 10 minutes or so, I
Yeah.
added all the red into it because I thought it needed a little more contrast and a little
Oh,
more pop. So originally I had put a darker scarf on our
okay.
mole and all the little red and all the trees' eyes I added, so it kind of
Oh,
looked
I
more like a
see. Yeah.
fire in there.
Nice. Yeah. So that's little Moley, and he was going out into the wilderness, which we were doing last week. And it's this big moment where we're about to meet Mr. Badger. And I've always thought, badgers are mean and scary, and I didn't know what to expect. So we're going to meet Mr. Badger today, and he's kind of surprising.
Yeah, he may not be what you expect, but I am gonna have to ask everyone to forgive me. I decided I wanted to do an interior today since a lot of it is meeting Badger and exploring where Badger lives. So I did a little bit of pre-work for this one. I'm not totally going into it with nothing because here's a little art tip for everyone that when you're drawing, there's this thing called perspective. When you're making something three-dimensional become two-dimensional, there's certain like tricks that you use to do that, and one of them is one point perspective. And that's just kind of tricks your eye into thinking there's depth somewhere when there isn't. And that can take a while to lay out a grid like that. And I didn't think you guys wanted to watch me just drawing straight lines for like a half hour. So
Right.
I did this ahead of time. So you'll still get to see me draw live, but this part's already done where it was like the room structure I already laid out.
Okay, our last chapter ended with Mr. The mole and the river rat, Moley and River Rat, are standing at the badger's front door, and it's snowing, and they've rung the doorbell, and they're waiting. That's where we begin. Chapter 4, and the title is Mr. Badger. They waited patiently for what seemed a very long time, stamping in the snow to keep their feet warm. At last, they heard the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps approaching the door from the inside. It seemed, as the mole remarked to the rat, like someone walking in carpet slippers that were too large for him and down at heel, which was intelligent of Mole because that's exactly what it was. There was the noise of a bolt shot back, and the door opened a few inches, enough to show a long snout and a pair of sleepy, blinking eyes. Now, the very next time this happens, said a gruff and suspicious voice, I shall be exceedingly angry. Who is this? disturbing people at on such a night. Speak up!" "Oh, Badger," cried the rat, "let us in, please. It's me, Rat, and my friend Mole, and we've lost our way in the snow." "What, Ratty, my dear little man!" exclaimed the badger in quite a different voice. "Come along in, both of you at once. Why, you must be perished." "Well, I never! Lost in the snow, and in the wildwood too, and at this time of night. But come in with you, come in." The two animals tumbled over each other in their eagerness to get inside and heard the door shut behind them with great joy and relief. The badger, who wore a long dressing gown and whose slippers were indeed very down at heel, carried a flat candlestick in his paw and had probably been on his way to bed when their summons sounded. He looked kindly on them and patted both their heads. "This is not the sort of night for small animals to be out," he said paternally. "I'm afraid you've been up to some of your pranks again, Ratty. But come along, come in the kitchen. There's a first-rate fire there, and supper and everything." He shuffled on in front of them, carrying the light, and they followed him, nudging each other in an anticipating sort of way, down a long, gloomy, and, to tell you the truth, decidedly shabby passage, into a sort of a central hall, out of which they could dimly see other long tunnel-like passages branching off, passages mysterious and without apparent end. But there were doors in the hall as well, stout, oaken, comfortable-looking doors. One of these the badger flung open, and at once they found themselves in the glow and warmth of a large, fire-lit kitchen. The floor was well-worn red brick, and on the wide hearth burnt a fire of logs between two attractive chimney corners tucked away in the wall, well out of the suspicion of draught. A double high-backed bench facing each other on either side of the fire gave further sitting accommodations for the sociably disposed. In the middle of the room stood a large table of plain boards placed on trestles with benches down each side. At one end of it, where an armchair stood pushed back, were spread the remains of the badger's plain but ample supper. Rows of spotless plates winked from the shelves of the dresser at the far end of the room, and from the rafters overhead hung hams, bundles of dried herbs, nets of onions, and baskets of eggs. It seemed a place where heroes could fitly feast after victory, where weary harvesters could line up in scores along the table and keep their harvest home with mirth and song, or where two or three friends of simple tastes could sit about as they pleased and eat and smoke and talk in comfort and contentment. The ruddy brick floor smiled up at the smoky ceiling. The oaken benches, shiny with long wear, exchanged cheerful glances with each other. Plates on the dresser grinned at pots on the shelf, and the merry firelight flickered and played over everything without distinction. The kindly badger thrust them down on a bench to toast themselves at the fire, and bade them remove their wet coats and boots. Then he fetched them dressing gowns and slippers, and himself bathed the mole's shin with warm water and mended the cut with the sticking plaster till the whole thing was just as good as new, if not better. In the embracing light and warmth, warm and dry at last, with weary legs propped up in front of them, and a suggestive clink of plates being arranged on the table behind, it seemed to the storm-driven animals now in safe anchorage that the cold and trackless wildwood just left outside was miles and miles away, and all that they had suffered in it half forgotten dream. When at last they were thoroughly toasted, the badger summoned them to the table where he had been busily laying out a repast. They had felt pretty hungry before, but when they actually saw at last the supper that was spread before them, really it seemed only a question of what they should attack first, where all was so attractive, and whether the other would obligingly wait for them till they had time to give them attention. Conversation was impossible for a long time, and when it slowly resumed, it was that regrettable sort of conversation that results from talking with your mouth full. The badger did not mind that sort of thing at all, nor did he take any notice of elbows on the table or everybody speaking at once. As he did not go into society himself, he had got an idea that these things belonged to the things that didn't really matter. But we know, of course, that he was wrong and took too narrow of a view, because they do matter very much, though it would take too long to explain why. He sat in his armchair at the head of the table and nodded gravely at intervals as the animals told their stories, and he did not seem surprised or shocked at anything, and he never said, "I told you so," or "just what I always said," or remarked that they ought to have done so and so, or ought not to have done something else. The mole began to feel very friendly towards him. When supper was finally finished at last, and each animal felt that his skin was now as tight as was decently safe, and that by this time he didn't care a hang for anyone or anything, they gathered round the glowing embers of the great wood fire and thought how jolly it was to be sitting up so late and so independent and so full. And after they had chatted for a time about general things in general, the badger said heartily, "Now then, tell us the news from your part of the world. How's old Toad going on?" "Oh, from bad to worse," said the rat gravely, while the mole, cocked up on a settle and basking in the firelight, his heels higher than his head, tried to look properly mournful. "Another smashed up only last week, and a bad one. You see, he will insist on driving himself, and he's hopelessly incapable. If he'd only employ a decent, steady, well-trained animal, pay him good wages, and leave everything to him, he'd get on all right. But no, he's convinced he's a heaven-born driver, and nobody can teach him anything, and all the rest follows." "How many has he had?" "Wrecks, that is?" inquired the badger gloomily. "Smashes or machines?" asked the rat. "Oh, well, after all, it's the same thing with Toad. This is the seventh. As for the others, the coach house of his, well, it's literally piled up to the roof with fragments of motor cars, none of them bigger than your hat. That accounts for the other six so far as they can be accounted for." "He's been in the hospital 3 times," put in the mole. "And as for the fines he's had to pay, it's simply awful to think of." "Yes, and that's part of the trouble," continued the rat. "Toad's rich, we all know, but he's not a millionaire. And he's a hopelessly bad driver, and quite regardless of law and order. Killed or ruined, it's got to be one of those two things sooner or later. Badger, we're his friends. Ought we not do something?" The badger went through a bit of thinking. Now, look here, he said at last, rather severely. Of course, I can't do anything now. His two friends assented, quite understanding his point. No animal, according to the rules of animal etiquette, is ever expected to do anything strenuous or heroic or anything moderately active during the off season of winter. All are sleepy, some actively asleep. All are weather-bound, more or less, and all are resting from arduous days and nights during which every muscle in them has been severely tested and every energy kept at a full stretch. Very well, then, continued the badger, but when once the year has really turned and the nights are shorter, and halfway through them one rouses and feels fidgety and wanting to be up and doing by sunrise, if not before, Both animals nodded gravely. They knew. Well, then, went on the badger, that is, you and me and our friend the mole here, well, we'll take Toad seriously in hand. We'll stand no nonsense whatsoever. We'll bring him back to reason by force if need be. We'll make him be a sensible toad. Well, you're a sleep rat. Not me, said the rat, waking up with a jerk. He's been asleep 2 or 3 times since supper, said the mole, laughing. He himself was feeling quite wakeful and even lively, though he didn't know why. The reason was, of course, that he'd been naturally an underground animal by birth and breeding. The situation of Badger's house exactly suited him and made him feel at home, while the rat, who slept every night in a bedroom with windows which opened on a breezy river, naturally felt the atmosphere still and oppressive. Well, it's time we're off to bed, said the badger, getting up and fetching flat candlesticks. Come along, you two, and I'll show you to your quarters. And take your time tomorrow morning. Breakfast at any hour you please. He conducted the two animals to a long room that seemed half bedchamber and half loft. The badger's winter stores, which indeed were visible everywhere, took up half the room. Piles of apples, turnips, and potatoes, baskets full of nuts, and jars of honey. But the two little white beds on the remainder of the floor looked soft and inviting. And the linen on them, though coarse, were clean and smelt beautifully of lavender, and the mole and the water rat, shaking off their garments in some 30 seconds, tumbled in between the sheets in great joy and contentment. In accordance with the kindly badger's injunctions, the two tired animals came down to breakfast very late next morning and found a bright fire burning in the kitchen and two young hedgehogs sitting on a bench at the table, eating oatmeal porridge out of wooden bowls. The hedgehogs dropped their spoons, rose to their feet, and ducked their heads respectfully as they entered. There, sit down, said the rat pleasantly, and go on with your porridge. We're here. Where are you, youngsters? Where have you come from? Lost your way in the snow, I suppose? Yes, yes, said the elder of the two hedgehogs respectfully. Me and little Billy here, we were trying to find our way to school. Mother would have us go. Was the weather ever so? And of course we lost ourselves, sir. And Billy, he got frightened and took and cried, and being young and faint-hearted. And at last we happened up against Mr. Badger's back door and made so bold as to knock, sir, for Mr. Badger. He's a kind-hearted person, as everybody knows. I understand, said the rat, cutting himself some rashers from a side of bacon, while the mole dropped some eggs into a saucepan. And what's the weather out like outside? You needn't, sir, me quite so much, he added. It's terrible, sir, deeply deep, terrible deep the snow is, said the hedgehog. No getting out for the likes of you today. Where's Mr. Badger? Inquired the mole as he warmed the coffee pot before the fire. He's gone into his study, replied the hedgehog, and said as how he was going to be particularly busy this morning and on no account was he to be disturbed. This explanation, of course, was thoroughly understood by everyone present. The fact is, as already set forth, when you live in a life of intense activity for 6 months in the year and of comparable or actual somnolence for the other 6, during the latter period, you cannot be continually pleading sleepiness when there are people about or things to be done. The excuse gets monotonous. The animals well knew that Badger, having eaten a hearty breakfast, had retired to his study and settled himself in an armchair with his legs up on one another on and a red handkerchief over his face, and he was busy in his usual style at this time of the year, taking a nap. The front door bell clanging loudly, and the rat, who was very greasy with buttered toast, sent Billy, the smaller hedgehog, to see who it might be. There was a sound of much stamping at the hall, and presently Billy returned in front of the otter, who threw himself on the rat with an embrace and shout of affectionate greeting. Get off, spluttered the rat with his full mouth. Though I should find you here all right, said the otter cheerfully. They were all in a great state of alarm along the river when I arrived this morning. Rat never been home Rat never been home all night, nor Mole either. Something dreadful must have happened, they said, and the snow had covered up your tracks, of course. But I knew when people were in any fix, they mostly went to Badger, or else Badger got to know of it somehow. So I came straight off here through the wild wood and the snow. My, it was fine, coming through the snow as the red snow sun was rising and showing against the black tree trunks. As you went along into the stillness, every now and then masses of snow slid off the branches suddenly with a flop, making you jump and run for cover. Snow castles and snow caverns had sprung up out of nowhere in the night, and snow bridges and terraces, ramparts. I could have stayed and played with them for hours. Here and there, great branches had been torn away by the sheer weight of the snow, and robins perched and hopped on them in their perky, conceited way, just as if they had done it themselves. A ragged string of wild geese passed overhead, high on the gray sky, and a few rooks whirled over the trees, inspected and flapped off homewards with a disgusted expression. But I met no sensible being to ask the news of. About halfway across, I came on a rabbit sitting on a stump, cleaning his silly face with his paws. He was pretty scared animal when I crept up behind him and placed a heavy forepaw on his shoulder. I had to cuff his head once or twice to get any sense of it. At last, I managed to extract him from him that the mole had been seen in the wildwood last night by one of them. It was the talk of the burrows, he said, how Mole, Mr. Rat's particular friend, was in a bad fix. Now how he had lost his way, and they were up and out hunting and were shivving him around and round. Then why didn't any of you do something? I asked. You mustn't be blessed with brains, but there are hundreds and hundreds of you, big stout fellows as fat as butter, and your burros running in all directions, and you could have taken him in and made him safe and comfortable, or tried to at all events. What? Us? He merely said, do something, us rabbits? So I cuffed him again and left him. There was nothing else to be done. At any rate, I had learned something. And if I had the luck to meet any of them, I had learned something more, or they would. Weren't all you nervous? Asked the mole, some of yesterday's terror coming back to him at the mention of the wildwood. Nervous? The otter showed a gleaming set of strong white teeth as he laughed. Ha! I'd give them nerves if any of them tried anything on me. Here, Mole, fry some slices of ham like the good little chap you are. I'm frightfully hungry, and I've got any amount to say to Ratty here. Haven't seen him for an age. So the good-natured mole, having cut some slices of ham, set the hedgehogs to fry it and returned to his own breakfast, while the otter and the rat, their heads together, eagerly talked river shop, which is a long shop and talk that is endless, running on like a babbling river itself. A plate of fried ham had just been cleared and sent back for more when the badger entered, yawning and rubbing his eyes and greeting them all in his quiet, simple way, with kind inquiries for everyone. It must be getting on to lunchtime, he remarked to the otter. Better stop and have it with us. You must be hungry this cold morning. Rather, replied the otter, winking at the mole. The sight of this greedy young hedgehog stuffing themselves with fried ham makes me feel positively famished. The hedgehogs, who were just beginning to feel hungry again after their porridge and after working so hard at frying, looked timidly at the Mr. Badger, but were too shy to say anything. Here, you two youngsters, be off. Be off home to your mother, said the badger kindly. I'll send some with you and show you the way. You won't want any dinner today, I'll be bound. He gave them sixpence apiece and pat on their head, and they went off with respectful swinging of caps and touching of forelocks. Presently, they all sat down to lunch together. The mole found himself placed next to Mr. Badger, and as the other two were still deep in river gossip from which nothing could divert them, he took the opportunity to tell Mr. Badger how comfortable and homelike it all felt for him. Once well underground, he said, you know exactly where you are. Nothing can happen to you and nothing can get at you. You're entirely your own master, and you don't have to consult anyone or mind what they say. Things go all the same overhead, and you let them, and don't bother about them. When you want to, up you go, and there the things are, waiting for you. The badger simply beamed on him. That's exactly what I said, he replied. There's no security or peace or tranquility except underground. And then, if your ideas get larger and you want to expand, why, a dig and a scrape, and there you are. If you feel your house is a bit too big, you stop up a hole or two, and there you are again. No builders, no tradespeople, no remarks passed on by your fellows looking over your wall, and above all, no weather. Look at Rat now. A couple of feet of floodwater, and he's got to move into hired lodgings, uncomfortable, inconveniently situated, and a horrible expense. Take Toad. I said nothing against Toad Hall, quite the best house in these parts, as a house. But supposing a fire breaks out, where's Toad? Supposing tiles are blown off, or walls sink or crack, or windows get broken, where's Toad? Supposing the rooms are draughty, I hate a draughty myself, where's Toad? No up and out of doors is good enough to roam about and get one's living in, but underground to come back to at last. That's my idea of home." The mole assented heartily, and the badger, in consequence, got very friendly with him. When lunch is over, he said, "I'll take you all around my little place. I'll see you'll see and appreciate it. You'll understand what domestic architecture ought to be. You do." After lunch, accordingly, when the other two had settled themselves into the chimney corner and started a heated argument on the subject of eels, the badger lighted a lantern and bade the mole follow him. Crossing the hall, they passed down one of the principal tunnels, and the wavering light of the lantern gave glimpses on either side rooms, both large and small, some mere cupboards, others nearly as broad and imposing as Toad's dining hall. A narrow passage at right angles led them into another corridor, and here the same thing was repeated. The mole was staggered at the size, the extent, the ramifications of it all, at the length of the dim passages, the solid vaultings of the crammed stored chambers, the masonry everywhere, the pillars, the arches, the pavements. "How on earth, Badger," he said at last, "did you ever find time and strength to do all of this? It's astonishing." "It would be astonishing indeed," said the badger simply, "if I had done it. But, as a matter of fact, I did none of it, only cleaned out the passages and chambers as far as I need of them. There's lots more of it all around about. I see you don't understand, and I must explain it to you. Well, very long ago, on the spot where the wildwood waves now, before ever it had planted itself and grown up the way it is now, there was a city of people, you know, here where we're standing. They lived and walked and talked and slept and carried on their business. Here they stabled their horses and feasted. From here they rode out to fight or drove out to trade. They were powerful people and rich and great builders. They built to last, for they thought their city would last forever. But what has become of them all?" asked the mole. "Who can tell?" said the badger. "People come, they stay for a while, they flourish, they build, and they go. It's their way. But we remain. There were badgers here, I've been told, long before that same city ever came to be. And now there are badgers here again. We are an enduring lot, you know, and we may move out for a time, but we wait and we're patient and we come back. And so it will ever be." "Well, and then they went at last, these people?" asked the mole. "When they went," continued the badger, "the strong winds and persistent rains took the matter in hand, patiently, ceasingly, year after year. Perhaps we badgers, too, in our small way, helped a little, who knows? It was all down, 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 gradually ruined and leveling and disappearing. Then it was all up, 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 gradually, as seeds grew to saplings and saplings to forest trees, and bramble and fern came creeping in to help. Leaf mold rose and obliterated streams, and their water freshets brought sand and soil to clog and to cover. And in the course of time, our home was ready for us again, and we moved in. Above, up above us on the surface, the same thing happened. Animals arrived, liked the look of the place, took up their quarters, settled down, spread, and flourished. They didn't bother themselves about the past. They never do. They're too busy. The place was a bit bumpy and hillocky naturally and full of holes, but that was rather an advantage. And they don't bother about the future either. The future, when perhaps the people will move in again for a time, as we may well very be. The Wildwood is pretty well populated by now, with all the usual lot, good and bad and indifferent. I name no names. It takes all sorts to make a world, but I fancy you know something about them yourselves by this time. Oh, I do indeed, said the mole with a slight shiver. Well, well, said the badger, patting him on the shoulder. It was your first experience of them, you see. They're not so bad, really, and must all well live and let live. But I'll pass the word around tomorrow, and I think you'll have no further trouble. Any friend of mine walks where he likes in this country, or I'll know the reason why. When they got back to the kitchen, they found the rat walking up and down and very restless. The underground atmosphere was oppressing to him and getting on his nerves, and he seemed really to be afraid that the river would run away if he wasn't there to look after it. So he had his overcoat on and he thrust his belt on again and he said, "Come along, Mole," he said anxiously as soon as he caught sight of them. "We must get off while it's daylight. Don't want to spend another night in the wildwood again." "It'll be right, my fine fellow. All right, fine fellow," said the otter. "I'm coming along with you, and I know every path blindfolded by now. And if there's a head that needs to be punched, you can confidently rely upon me to punch it. You really needn't fret, Ratty," added the badger placidly. My passages run further than you think, and I've bolt holes to the edge to the woods in several directions, though I don't care for everybody to know about them. When you really have to go, you shall leave by one of my shortcuts. Meantime, make yourself easy and sit down again." The rat, nevertheless, still anxious to be off and to attend to his river, so the badger, taking up his lantern again, led the way along a damp and airless tunnel that wound and dipped, part vaulted, part hewn through solid rock, for a weary distance that seemed to be miles. At last, daylight began to show itself confusedly through tangled growth overhanging the mouth of the passage, and the badger, bidding them a hasty goodbye, pushed them through hurriedly through the opening, made everything look as natural as possible again, with creeping brushwood and dead leaves, and then retreated. They found themselves standing on the very edge of the wildwood. Rocks and brambles and tree roots behind them, confusedly heaped and tangled. In front, a great space of quiet fields, hemmed by lines of hedges black on the snow, and far ahead, a glint of the familiar old river, while the wintry sun hung red and low on the horizon. The otter, as knowing all the paths, took charge of the party, and they trailed all out on a beeline for a distant stile. Paused there a moment, and looking back, they saw the whole mass of the wildwood, dense, menacing, compact, grimly set in vast white surrounding. Simultaneously, they turned and made swift for home, for firelight and the familiar things it played on, for the voice sounding their cheery outside their window. of the river that they knew and trusted in all its moods that never made them afraid with any amazement. As he hurried along, eagerly anticipated the moment when he would be at home again among all the things he knew and liked. The mole saw clearly that he was an animal of tilled field and hedge row linked to the plowed furrow, the frequented pasture, the lane of evening lingerings, the cultivated garden plot. For others, the stubborn endurance or the clash of actual conflict that went with nature in the rough. He must be wise, must keep to the pleasant places in which his lines were laid and which held adventure enough in their way to last for a lifetime. My word. Keep drawing. It's my turn to finally sit and watch for a bit. And I kind of got dizzy this morning. I need to drink some water. The writer, Kenneth, can write some sentences that are really long and descriptive.
Yeah, I think I'll finish up at least the blueberries here that I was drawing in the foreground before I call it for this episode.
Appropriate blueberries as you live in New Jersey.
Yep, the blueberry capital out here
Yeah,
where I live. A lot of people don't realize that New Jersey has a lot of farmland in the south part of Jersey. They think of like the very dense sort of city part in the north, and they don't really get a chance, they don't really know about the beautiful southern part with the pine trees and the farms and all the wonderful stuff that we have down here.
I lived near Heather for about 10 years and never had been to New Jersey in my life. And that's the part of New Jersey I lived in, the southern part that Heather is describing. And Heather lives out in a town that's surrounded by blueberries, and the blueberry fields are they're beautiful. And it's really quite beautiful. And it's not what people expect. It's sort of like the story we're reading. You expect New Jersey to be like New York, busy
Mm-hmm.
and streets and all the traffic and the da 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 da. And it's really quite different. And it's sort of like what the mole and the rat, what they're describing. He realizes, wow, I really kind of like my more sophisticated life, more domesticated life, where things are a little more. The bushes are trimmed, there's pathways, and it's not like the wildwood.
So I think I'm done for now. I will definitely finish up the render before the next 2 weeks when we meet again and continue our story. But I think you got a gist of where I'm going with it. This very bountiful kitchen, everybody in their little bathrobes, just having a cozy little night.
Yeah, it's warm and they're ready to kick up their feet. And you're right. It's a lot more interesting to watch you fill in the perspective than draw the grid.
Right.
But drawing the grid is very important.
Yeah, you got to lay the groundwork before you can do the more fun and interesting stuff. But next time you see it, there'll be a lot more bounty in vegetables and fruits and whatever badgers eat. I maybe have to look that up a little bit and find out more of what is badger food.
Yeah.
But yeah, so next time I'll have the render done. You can see all the cool stuff I decided to put in there. And it was a fun one. I knew I probably wasn't going to finish, but it was fun drawing an interior, which I haven't done on the show yet.
Yeah, you can feel the warmth and the security, but I'm sort of like the river rat. I don't want to be underground. I get claustrophobia, which means I don't like closed in places without a window or a door real quickly to get to. And Sound good to me.
Yeah, you can like
I want to
both.
be
I don't think
warmed
you
by fire. Hmm?
you can like both, going on an adventure now and then going back home to somewhere warm and cozy. I think that's perfectly fine. You don't have to pin yourself down to just be a mole or a rat.
Well, I think I'm going to be a rat. I want to live by the river with the door open, the window open, and the hedge.
Well, it was fun today. It was a good story. It was fun finally meeting our little badger friend here, and I can't wait to see what kind of adventures they get up to next time.
Indeed, indeed. It's the story will continue, and then we have another story waiting, coming our way, which I can't wait to get to.
Yeah, and that one's fun because I haven't read that one yet, so that one's gonna be really interesting that I get to read a new book for this.
Oh, really? Well, and it's a hint. If you want to read ahead or whatever, it's called The Jungle Book. And I've only seen the movie, I've never read the book. So that's kind of the interesting part.
Yep, we will see you guys in 2 weeks back here, back to our normal time at 11 o'clock, hopefully. And join us. As always, share your art with us. Remember to like and subscribe because that really helps us. And if you can share it, that's even better. You can just share the link directly on the social media there. Kind of helps the algorithms show it to more people who we don't necessarily know and who haven't had a chance to experience something like this before. So whenever you share it, that kind of helps feed that algorithm a little bit and like, oh, people like what these guys are doing. And so you can do
Like
that.
us, please.
We really appreciate it. Until then, for Blake and myself, keep enjoying stories and, keep feeding that imagination.
Take care, y'all. Bye.